Thank you all so much for being here today. We sure appreciate it. We're glad to see every one of you. Hope you're having a good time. I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to introduce the next panel, but I wanted to remind you real quick that you do have lunch on your own from 12:15 to 1:30. But if you want to be back in here around 1:30, we have a musician who's going to come around 1:30 and do some music. If she gets here on time, she's running behind, she said. But she should be here around 1:30, and that'll be a little prelude to Morris's keynote, 2:15, which you don't want to miss. He's just a beautiful speaker, beautiful reader. If you don't know his work, you must, because he's one of our most important writers right now. So be sure to come back for the keynote. Come a little early, and you may get to hear Sue Masick if she's able to make it over here on these slippery roads around 1:30. There is another book signing that directly follows this next host session. That starts at 12:15. So thanks again. I want to introduce my colleague Kate Edgerton, who is the chair of the English program, and she helped make this possible. So please give her a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Berea. We're so excited to see folks and glad that Silas and the Loyal Jones Appalachian Center work with us to bring amazing writers to this community, to our students, and to those of you who visit us here. The next two panels are going to go back to back, just as we've been doing this morning. And we're going to start off with We're Here, Diversity in Appalachian Literature, with Crystal Wilkinson, Julia Watts, Jason Howard, and I understand Paula Nelson can't join us this morning, but Sam Gleaves is going to sit in, and we're glad to see him. And once these folks are done with their 45 minutes, the second group we have today, you're not going to want to leave, because who wants to miss Country Badassery? Gender Roles in Appalachian Literature, with Marianne Worthington, Ron Houchin, Richard Haig, and Amy Green. So welcome very much, and we're eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Kate. I was born here just the same as you. Another time, another day. I'm sure the good Lord took his time, made each of us just this way. I walked beside you step by step, and it never crossed my mind that I would grow up one of the different kind. That didn't stop me from chopping the wood, scraping my knees like all boys should, going down to the creek in the noonday sun, wringing out my shirt when the work got done. First things first, I'm a blue-collar man with scars on my knuckles, dust on my hands. Probably wouldn't have ever known I've got a man waiting on me at home. To tell you the truth, I don't want to fight, just want to say one thing outright to you. Ain't we flesh and blood all through? And ain't we brothers too? I took a job and worked right by you, walked down in that hole beside you. Thought I heard some whisper sound, got found out, word got around. I got made out for something I'm not, called everything but a child of God. Didn't mind to show it out in the parking lot. So I cut my coat with my head hung down, just like a stranger in my own town. Got bitter day by day, went home every night with the mess they made. First things first, I'm a blue-collar man with scars on my knuckles, dust on my hands. Probably wouldn't have ever known I've got a man waiting on me at home. To tell you the truth, I don't want to fight. Just want to say one thing outright to you. Ain't we flesh and blood all through? And ain't we brothers too? Tell me I'm not man enough to set foot in that mine. Go on and tell me that once more, to my face this time. To tell you the truth, I don't want to fight. Just want to say one thing outright to you. Ain't we flesh and blood all through? And ain't we brothers too?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, we're awful proud to claim Sam as a graduate at Berea College, as you can see. So for those of you who were here yesterday, y'all know that the symposium was kicked off by the great Bell Hooks and a wonderful, wonderful keynote. And so I wanted to begin this panel with a quote from her essay titled "Writing Without Labels," which can be found in her collection called Remembered Rapture. When I am at my desk writing, I always think of myself as a writer who is a black woman. I never think I am a black woman writer. Race and gender are made to come first in the world outside, where if one is from a marginalized group, anything about you that does not conform to white male norms is acknowledged first and foremost. Writers from marginalized groups are usually faced with two options: over-identification with an identity or disidentification. And I'm just wondering how we all would respond to that in our own writing lives. What do y'all think?
Okay, we're looking at each other politely to decide who goes first. I think that when I sit down and write, and maybe as a fiction writer, it's a little different. I don't even think of myself that much. I think it's a way of, kind of transcending the self. But at the same time, I think that my characters still speak for a part of me, or different parts of me, depending on who the characters are. And so I guess this is another kind of resisting labels too, is that I'm not even thinking who I am when I write. I'm thinking, who are these people? Who are these people on the page? And can I get them to talk?
What were the two options? She said over-identification.
Over-identification with an identity or disidentification.
I think at times as a writer, I'd like to be in the latter category and not have an identification except for the identification of writer, but that's not possible for me. I can't go anywhere in the world and not be a black woman, even within my own house. I can't go anywhere in the world and not be a black woman, so that's just a natural part of me, and nobody can see it. You can hear it when I talk, but I also can't go anywhere in the world without being from the knobs. So I probably, if those are the two options, go with the former. I probably go with the over identification, although I don't think that's present with me when I'm writing. I think it comes out, though, probably in my writing.
I think I identify as a traditional musician first, as somebody that learned music in a collective kind of community experience. I had so many generous mentors who, and I'm fortunate that a lot of my music came from the person-to-person experience like that. So that's my foremost identity. And although I do believe there are a lot of LGBT stories that are on the margins in Appalachia, and I want to tell those, I identify as an Appalachian musician always and first.
I guess I don't know, I go back and forth with it. I find myself often caught in the middle of, being proud of identities that I have, certainly rooted in Appalachia, claim that, as a gay man, claim that. But also those categories sometimes come with expectations of what should be in your work, what should not be in your work, and a lot of times I think that one is expected to speak for a whole group versus maybe just an individual experience, and so I chafe against that sometimes. What do y'all?
I think too, there's the danger of being pigeonholed so that you're reaching only a very limited audience, or the audience that is most like you. I know that if I go into a chain type bookstore, well, if they do carry my books, that's another issue we won't get into. But generally they will be shelved in a little two-shelf section that says lesbian and gay. I'm proud to have my books in that section. However, does that mean that only people who go to that section might have an interest in my books? Are those the only people that my books have something to say to? I don't think so. And I mean, I've even, and maybe this is even more troubling, been to some chain bookstores in the past that have the African American literature section, and it is completely, segregated is a really bad word to use, but it is from everything else. And while certainly there are going to be people who come into a store saying, I want a lesbian novel. Why does that have to be the only place it goes? So, I mean, I think that the over-identification, that's also a danger, is that, you end up preaching to the choir all the time.
I think there's a certain burden of representation that goes with my work being Appalachian and being African American. I have often been told that I'm not black enough. I don't know what that means. I don't know how much more black I could be. I'm not, or how much more. Nobody ever has told me I'm not woman enough. But I have been told that my work is not black enough, and again, that there's a burden of representation in that regard. And it has to do, I think, with the Appalachian themes, and it has to do with stereotypes again, of this expectation that there are still no African Americans in Appalachia, which I find just crazy. There's 2 million of us in Appalachia. There's about 2 million, 1.8 African Americans in Appalachia. I'm not. I don't know. That's what that comes up a lot, and I kind of this idea of not being black enough, and I don't understand it. I'm not an urban African American, if that's what that means. I'm an Appalachian. That's just who I am, and that's what I write about.
I'm fortunate to have the music to communicate through as a medium, and I think that especially with traditional music, people often will listen to the story and the sound that they're familiar with before they, bring in their preconceptions or, pick apart whether they agree with what I'm saying or not. I think I'm very fortunate to have that.
And I think as a bookstore owner, I have to talk about this labeling thing in the bookstores. I believe, and this is a call to action to all of you, when you go in a bookstore and you see these labels and you think that someone's book that you know, not necessarily someone that you know. I used to be a part of the Kentucky Book Mafia, and we made our business as we traveled all over the place to change people's books. Like we'd go up and somebody would be only in the regional section, and we would put them in literature. So I'm all about it, and call that out to you all to do that. If you go and you see all the Appalachian writers in the regional section, put them in mainstream fiction or poetry or wherever. We shouldn't be, I mean, it's convenient to go in a bookstore and do that, but be subversive. Do it.
It's interesting because we're living in an age where some of these labels, at least in music, I write a lot about music, so I'll make that comparison, but a lot of these genres in music are falling away and more umbrella terms are being used. Americana is one that I can think of that encompasses a wide range of traditions, from more traditional country to gospel to blues, rock, roots music. So I wonder, we need to be doing that in literature too, don't you think?
We do, yeah.
What issues, I'm just wondering, because we all write about from different places, because we're all different individuals, I'm just curious as to any barriers that y'all might have run up against within the region, perhaps, but in your writing, in your subject matter. How has your work been received?
You know, it's really only been in fairly recent years that I've started getting more inclusion in the sort of, I hesitate to say mainstream Appalachian writing community. And I don't think that it was an issue of people being homophobic so much as my work just not being out there where people could see, because it was, isolated into the LGBT genre. And so, that's been a barrier that fortunately has broken in the last few years.
I think, again, the stereotype, when I first had Blackberries published in 2000, all those many moons ago, it's not been that long ago, but my agent had trouble with getting my book published because no one believed that there were people, particularly African American people, that lived in rural. Because I was talking about, I'd say something about an outhouse or some of the things that, many of my family still live that way, and they just didn't believe it. So they kept saying, I was writing contemporary stories, but they said when she wants to write something more contemporary, insert urban here, then we'd be more willing to publish it. We like her lyricism, we liked her characterization, and so sometimes there's these code words. And I found in my own experience that contemporary was the code word for urban fiction for me. And as far as within the region, I don't think there have been any barriers. I've felt really welcome in the region. If I'm honest, I could say that, of course, there's always, at times, I do feel invisible, and I always, it's always my way to kind of self-deprecate or make a joke out of it, but I always say, how can I be, at the time when all this was going on, I had dreadlocks down to my waist, and I said, okay, I weigh 250 pounds, I'm the only black person in the room, I have dreadlocks down my back, why can't you see me? There's no way I should be invisible.
Well, I feel like writing songs, I always had something to build on because there's such a long line of people from the mountains who use this traditional music and really give it a social consciousness and a current link, like Gene Ritchie or Sarah Ogan Gunning or Sue Massick or so many of the people that I just studied and listened to. So I never felt like it was inappropriate for me to do that because it had been done before,
How has the song that you sung, Ain't We Brothers, how has it been received? I know you have a new album coming out that's the title track from.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what mattered most to me is that the miner who the song is written for, his name is Sam Williams. He's from Kanawha County, West Virginia. He loved it, and so that meant the most to me because I felt a little bashful about sing. He's the lyrical eye, it's from his perspective, and I'd never met him until a few weeks ago, so I was pretty worried that, he might be upset, but he loved it, and he especially pointed out that he appreciated the line about having a man waiting on him at home. He's so much in love with his partner, Burley, and so it was wonderful to spend the day with them, and that's what mattered most to me. And I think people have been overwhelmingly generous and kind regarding the song.
I think as a creative nonfiction writer, some of the barriers maybe that I have faced is that, within Appalachian literature, creative nonfiction is really more new than it has been nationally. A lot of people come to the table with nonfiction, at least traditionally. There has been all of these tropes in Appalachian literature about grandparents and mamas and a more romanticized stereotype. And it's not to say that we can't write about grandparents, because I certainly have, but in creative nonfiction, one thing you have to do is make them fully human and fully realized characters and flawed and, not walking 3 miles one way to the well to get water and everything was hunky-dory and all that. Granny was a saint. So I think one thing that I have encountered in my own writing and even teaching is just this pushback against maybe going a bit deeper with their stories, and I've had people say, "Oh, well, that's too dark. I can't go there. That's too dark. It's my life is not my life is sunny, basically." And so that's one thing that I have encountered, and then to add a layer of gay identification on that. Some people not really within the region, but you go and describe what is it you write, you get in those conversations, "Oh, I write this," and they're like, "Well, I don't really read that." I'm like, "Well, okay." But especially in any type of writing, but creative nonfiction, we go with the tenet that the specific is universal. So my story, you may not be able to know my particular experience, but you will come at it from a different identity and standpoint and be able to relate. And so that would be, I guess, a barrier that I've encountered a bit.
I think it's wonderful, though, when moments happen when somebody is able to relate that you wouldn't think could have.
Yes.
And I didn't observe this personally, but a friend of mine who teaches my novel, Finding HF, was telling me about an undergraduate class in which he was teaching this novel, and there's a chapter in which the young lesbian teenage protagonist, HF, has kind of an intimate scene in a teenagery kissy way with another girl. Well, the other girl has never thought that she might be gay, and so afterward, she freaks out, panics, and there's a lot of emotional fallout from this intimate scene. And this student told me that there was this guy in his class, a very straight very traditionally masculine guy, who said that that chapter really, really spoke to him. Not because the young girl was, having anxiety about her sexual orientation, but because he had had a situation that had gotten intimate with a friend of the opposite sex, and had panicked about it afterwards because he didn't know how that was going to affect their friendship. And so, that's an example of, that it transcended the sexual orientation of the characters and turned out to just hit an emotional core with him. So that always makes me really happy when I hear about things like that.
Well, I just think that's true too. Yeah, I found that to be true in my work. When people come up and talk to you about it, they're not saying, that black 80-year-old woman in the third chapter reminded me of my white 80-year-old mother. They're just saying, thank you for writing that. That sassy woman reminded me of my family too. So I think that a lot of times when we get caught up in sort of our identification, we forget that that's our job as writers, and we hope we do our job, that it transcends across the pond, across all of the labels.
So we've witnessed a lot of change nationally, obviously, around diversity issues, but in the region, I think of Appalachian Studies Association has really in recent years been putting a premium on diversity and inclusivity. But what do you think nationally, people outside of the region, when you say that you're off introducing yourself and talking about where you're from, and I'm Appalachian, and what do you think people's images are from? Do you think that, about the region? Do you think that they're changing about us, or do you think that they're still stagnant?
I'm afraid, in my opinion, they're still stagnant. Every once in a while, I'm surprised. I find myself being really defensive about it when I go somewhere, but often it ends up being warranted because it never fails, and I usually can see the person. You can spot them from a mile away when they're coming towards you, and you know exactly what they're gonna ask. And they always, and Frank was talking about this yesterday, it's the same experience. Are there, it starts with, are there blacks in Kentucky? Really? You really live in Kentucky? Were you born there? Are you raised there? Really? And you didn't die? You didn't, what? You're not barefoot? You didn't marry your cousin? All of these things that come through. And I just don't know how long we're gonna have to deal with that, but I think it's still a problem. I think we can see by recent news, things that are going on in the news, that it's still a huge problem.
Yeah, well, I liked what you said yesterday on the panel about Kim Davis, that I think, probably we all, at least on this stage, know how we feel about Kim Davis's politics. But when it turns into, this is what hillbillies in Kentucky think, this is how hillbillies in Kentucky look, this is, then it's a very uncomfortable feeling to be like, well, I'm not defending her, but at the same time, it's more complex, than just the way they're making it. I've found that when I've done readings and signings outside the region, people are kind, but I still feel like I'm being treated like a novelty. Like, I could just listen to you talk all night. Say something with long eyes in it. Say white rice.
Or oil. That's how they would say it. Oil.
Right. And you said water yesterday, and I remember when I was in England the first time, and this wasn't even a public thing, but I was ordering lunch in a restaurant, and I asked for water. People came out of the kitchen to hear me say the word water. Say it again, love. So there is that feeling of being treated like sort of a novelty act. I don't think it's meant in an unkind way, but at the same time, it does, it does kind of get old rather quickly. One other quick thing, too, I also think that for people who live in major urban areas, there's not a differentiation between urban and rural cultures in different states, in Appalachian states. And I remember the first time I went to the Lambda Literary Awards, there was a comedian I really admire who was standing up talking, and she was talking about gay youth. And one of them that she was talking about lived in Louisville, Kentucky. And she said, can you imagine the horror of growing up gay in Louisville, Kentucky? And I was like, Louisville's awesome. It's the big city. So there are still a lot of assumptions. And I don't think they're with bad intent, but there's still assumptions that are being made.
I'm curious, Appalachian culture is, we value, on the one hand, tradition. We look to the past, part of ourselves do, in order to know that history and to build a future. But all of us, are sort of a newer, I guess, representation in some ways among Appalachian writers. Who are the people who have come before you all in Appalachian literature or culture that you might look to?
Well, I mean, if I go down my list, most of them are not, don't look like me. Most of them are white. If I'm going down my list of Appalachian writers, and I think that's unfortunate that most of them are white. But I think that two of my mentors I feel privileged to have had a chance to meet, and neither of them. Well, Belle knows it now, but Bell Hooks, doing what she's done as an African-American writer from Kentucky, and Gail Jones would be the other one, African-American writer with national prominence from Kentucky, and that's who I looked up to. They were my models as I've gone through this journey. And then, my peers, I have to give a nod to the Appalachian poets. That was the first time that I felt like I could embrace both I had been in African-American circles and I had been in Appalachian circles and felt somewhat at home in both of those circles, but it wasn't until there was an Appalachian circle that I didn't feel like I was straddling two worlds. All of us were sort of starting out together, so those were the people that I looked to as well.
I think a lot of the earliest authors that I read when I was a kid were really Southern authors rather than Appalachian authors, and I think we can say we have a lot in common with, say, Eudora Welty, Flannery O'Connor, but it's still different, right? It's still not that Appalachian mountain sensibility, I guess. So Harriet Arno, I think, was a really important early author that I came across, and I think especially because there were members of my family, extended family, who had that experience of moving, from the mountains, to work in the cities up north. I don't know, I always think a really seminal experience for me in terms of figuring out what I could write was when I was a teenager. And I already knew I was a writer. I'd been writing terrible stuff for a long time. My parents are in the audience. They could tell you about some stuff that I wrote and illustrated in crayon when I was 8 years old. But I think that there's so much pressure to think that, okay, I'm a writer, so I have to be urbane. I have to be sophisticated. I have to write about people who talk like people in Woody Allen movies, And I love Woody Allen movies, but that's not, that's not how I grew up, and that's not how the people around me talk. And so when I was, I guess, about 16, I came across Bobby Ann Mason's novel In Country. And I think it especially resonated with me because I was just about the same age that Sam was in that book. And so, to have something that contemporary with all those contemporary to the time, pop culture references with Bruce Springsteen and all that in there. You know, I said, you can write about where you're from. You know, you can write about you know, how the people around you talk. You don't have to do a fake impersonation, you know, of what you're reading or what you're seeing on a screen. So I mean, I always think that book in particular was a big turning point for me.
Loretta Lynn, I think. And I admire her so much because Loretta often says confusing things like, well, I wrote the pill, but I'm not a feminist. And it'd sit there and think, okay, Loretta, you know, nobody understands that. But then when you look at it on another level, you think, well, she's just Loretta. You know, she's just herself, and she writes as the human being that she is, which is kind of puts me in mind of the Bell Hooks quote that you started. You know, she chose her own way, and so I have a lot of admiration for her and representing working class people, and I also lately have been very inspired by the music of Ola Belle Reed from Lansing, North Carolina, and yeah, Ola Belle was a real powerhouse, and one of my favorite things that she ever said was, we all need each other whether we know it or not. And she wrote down, a lot of her songs, you know, have that beautiful subtlety of traditional music, you know, where she's saying so much in so few words, and I admire her greatly.
Well, it's always good to end with Loretta Lynn and Ola Belle Reed. So I love that quote. Can you say that again, Ola Belle?
Yeah, she said, we need each other, we all need each other, whether we know it or not. Yeah.
Big amen to that. Thank you.